Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Solutions to Wellness podcast, brought to you by Iron Alliance. Iron Alliance is the leadership and team development company that Zach and I founded after our experience in the Marine Corps and pro football. Had a lot of good successes and failures that we now structure for teams, leaders, and individuals to accelerate their paths to success. With that, we developed this Solutions to Wellness Expo, which is a community wellness event. We have police, fire, total wellness, including fitness, nutrition, and mental well-being, and demonstrations and speakers. It's going to be a great event for the community. We hope you join us and continue to grow that in the community. So today we have another great guest, and I'm going to have Zach introduce. Zach, take it away.
We're excited today. Solutions to Wellness brings you the first ever doctor to the show. We have Dr. Greg Abbott from the Wellness Way out of Green Bay. Dr. Abbott received his graduate degree at Life University in 2011, Doctor of Chiropractic. He's been practicing at the Wellness Way for 5 years now, correct?
Yep, 5 years now.
Started his own business with his wife right out of college, and then transitioned on to the Wellness Way. We're super excited to have you on the show, Dr. Greg Abbott. Welcome.
Thank you. This is I can do this stuff all day long, so I'm looking forward to this.
Excellent. Well, let's dive right in. Just tell the audience a little bit about what you do at the Wellness Way in Green Bay.
Absolutely. So, it's something that I think is unique, because when someone hears Doctor of Chiropractic, the first thing they're like, oh, you crack bones, like you fix back pain and headaches. And it's like, I get that. And of course we do that to a certain degree. But what is so unique with a lot of the patients that we see in our office is these are people coming in with infertility, with hormone issues, with autoimmune diseases, cancer, and anything across the board where they said, we just don't want the traditional medical answer. And so they're seeking more of that quote unquote alternative solution. And so they're coming in saying, all right, what can I do in a more natural sense to deal with some of these more chronic lifestyle-based diseases that unfortunately are so rampant today? And so, it's basically the chiropractic adjustment with nutrition, with certain supplementation, with lifestyle change, stress management, detoxification, a lot of different components that we believe everybody requires from a general well-being.
So that's pretty unique to the industry of chiropractics. It takes a unique individual and unique company to do that. What got you, was there sort of a moment that got you interested, or a lifestyle or a pathway that got you interested in more of that all-inclusive than just cracking bones, like you said?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll kind of give you a little more backstory, because, my first chiropractic experience was a sports injury. And so that was back in high school. And after getting adjusted and back pain went away almost immediately, I'm like, this is pretty cool. And I didn't really at the time think much into it, but fast forward to undergraduate, and I loved fitness, loved exercise. Again, being a college athlete, I'm like, hey, exercise science was the way to go. So that was my undergraduate degree. Still not fully knowing at the time that I wanted to get into chiropractic, but when the decision had to be made, I wanted to do some extra schooling beyond the undergraduate degree. And I said, well, it's either medicine or chiropractic. And I said, I just can't do medicine. It just didn't feel right for me. And so I went into chiropractic, not even knowing that there was anything beyond the adjustment, back pain, headaches, because that was even my first experience with it. But really, even during school, I had the traditional blinders on, so to speak, that I feel in a sad sense that, and it's not wrong either way, but that a lot of chiropractors have when they think, I'm going to adjust the world, which is cool. It helps a lot of people. But when I first got out of school and I'm adjusting everybody, and that was all I was doing, I wasn't talking nutrition. I wasn't talking lifestyle and stress management and all those types of things. And my patients weren't getting as well as I thought they could, as fast as they could. And I just knew there was something missing. And so it was more than anything that I almost stumbled upon the Wellness Way, because they were already doing it. I didn't even know it existed at the time. And so that's something that I'm sure we can talk about later with what I'm now doing. But, my initial introduction was to say, I didn't even know that chiropractors could do anything else. And so just kind of getting that background really got me fired up to just know, hey, why not? Why can't a chiropractor be a thought leader and really take over that whole, natural industry side of things that we feel ultimately medicine is missing.
When I was playing college football, I rolled my ankle and swelled up, just a sprained ankle, couldn't walk on it at all. A friend of mine said, go to this chiropractor and he's going to reset your ankle. And before this, I never went to a chiropractor, and this made no sense. All the trainers at school were like, don't go do that. But against their advice, I went and did it. He reset my ankle, hurt like you wouldn't believe, but reset my ankle. And the theory was that, the ankle gets out of place, he resets it, and it heals the proper way. Is that the ultimate theory behind chiropractic care, is to kind of reset your bones, your structures, so your body can heal the proper way?
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. And here's what is unique is I think to most people that whether they've ever been adjusted or not, they think chiropractors are bone doctors, which they are to a certain degree because we ultimately will adjust, realign the bones to ultimately give integrity of all the joints. That's kind of the more basic concept, but really the unique kind of next level that a lot of people don't realize is by resetting the bones and the joints, you're actually more than anything reestablishing proper nervous system flow. And that is where I believe the biggest misunderstanding is in chiropractic is we're more of a nervous system doctor than we are a spine and bone doctor. We have to use the bones to access the nervous system, but ultimately, why someone can have something like sciatica. Well, there's a bony misalignment, but ultimately there's a nervous system effect. And so same thing, if there's an ankle injury, you've probably seen it. You guys obviously watch sports all the time on TV. You've watched someone, basketball, football, whatever sport it is, looks like they roll their ankle, looks like they just broke it. It's like and they're 2 minutes later back in the game like nothing ever happened. That happens to someone else and they're out for 6 to 8 weeks with a major high ankle sprain. What's the difference? How quickly their nervous system can respond to that trauma. And so if that nervous system is firing on all cylinders and they roll that ankle, it goes right back to where it should and it prevents full damage to it. But if someone is just a little delayed in that neurological firing, they're going to go to that 6 to 8 week high ankle sprain and just have to nurse the injury. And so, again, all of that being said to say it's really how well is that nervous system integrity working? Because if that nervous system is working right, then not only should you really need to be adjusted much less, but also injury prevention, performance in general. It's actually been used in the Olympics. I went to Life University in Atlanta. They built part of their university down there was the 1996 Olympics. That was one of the training sites for the U.S. athletes. And they were most of them getting chiropractic care at the time because they realized by, not only certainly getting the spine and integrity of all the joints in line, better nervous system function led to better performance. And that was one of the really, really cool things. So it went away from, hey, come see us after you get hurt, which is still a very beneficial way, but it's saying, hey, before you ever get hurt, let's make sure everything's firing the way it needs to fire.
That's interesting. By the way, I was back in like a week, so it worked. It was crazy. So you're saying if I would have went in for more prevention and just, you go in, you get your alignments and whatnot, that basically improves your nervous system flow. And, if that injury were to occur as it did, I probably would have recovered faster.
Absolutely. I believe that's the real beauty of if we access what our body's capability is. And for instance, when I played college football, we had a team chiropractor. It was just one of the coolest things. It wasn't, hey, you're hurt, go see the chiropractor. It was, hey, everybody on the team's getting adjusted because they understood. And that's where I'm like, well, this is actually pretty cool. And I initially thought I wanted to get more into the sports chiropractic world, but then I realized as much as I love being an athlete and I love athletes, it's like, there's just a whole world of people out there that need help. And it just really kind of broadened my scope, so to speak, and who I was really wanting to work with once I got deeper into school.
So some of the stuff you spoke on earlier as far as a good foundation like nutrition and such, is it important for people to take this preemptive way of doing things like the chiropractic care, but also that's sort of like a foundation on top of what they're doing, and nutrition and just exercise, moving your nervous system. I'm sure you're extremely familiar with all the studies that show it's meant to move, it needs to move kind of thing. Can you dive into a little bit about that, the importance of, that nutrition and moving around and exercise?
Absolutely. And I think, sad to say, most people that we see, and I think this is always the way it's going to be with the general population, is they're most likely not going to do something until it's broken, until it needs fixing. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to work so hard to educate in an opposite direction, to say, before you break down, let's make sure you're doing the basic lifestyle necessities first, like the nutrition, like the exercise, some of those things. One of my favorite analogies when it comes to exercise and how much it is a energy booster, and I know you guys have experienced this. You get a good workout and you're jazzed up, you're ready to go. But most people are like, I don't have the energy to exercise, and I'm like, well, just do it. Start moving. You'll be amazed, because how many people sit on the couch all day. You're not going to be energized. If anything, it's energy draining. But as soon as you get up and you start moving your body, it's amazing how the energy starts to flow differently. But again, from the standpoint of the nutrition, my most common way I like to communicate nutrition to people is one of two things. Is number one, food is either going to be helpful or harmful, and we can dive into that in a bunch of different ways. There's so many diets and you name it, opinions on diets out there. So again, it's either helpful or it's going to be harmful. But number two, I think the more simple way to look at it is food is fuel, period. And what type of fuel do you want to be putting in your body? Do you want to be putting McDonald's in your body, or do you want to be putting, nice organic salad and grass-fed meat and other items like that? And so it's not just you've got to get the right quality. But then you also need to know, hey, sometimes even the quality needs something more specific. Because again, whether it's keto, paleo, high carb, low carb, whatever it is, we see people benefit from a variety of different types. So we don't attest to just eat this one type. Everything is individualized, because we all have a unique set of requirements that each of us run off of. Myself being a high level athlete, if I don't eat carbs, I suffer massively. And it drives people nuts that are trying to lose a bunch of weight. But I'm like, hey, my body is very favorable to carbohydrates. And so for me to say, hey, just because everybody says keto is a good thing to do, I should be doing it myself, I'd actually be sick. And so that's, again, how we kind of start to cater that nutrition to people, to say, yeah, we know inherently there's healthy choices you can make, but define health for a big population, I just don't think you can do it.
I love how you simplify it, saying food is either helpful or it's harmful. And you touched on it briefly. You walk through a grocery store, you see natural, organic, non-GMO, sugar-free, fat-free, all these different things. Walk us through, so we're grocery shopping. What are the helpful foods? What are the harmful foods?
Absolutely. I think, most people have heard, shop the perimeter of the store, and I think that is if you know nothing else, that's a good place to start. I mean, at least grocery stores have common sense to put the produce right in the front, fortunately. So again, I think that's a good place to start, but again, not necessarily wanting to go too far down a rabbit hole. There's a big difference between organic and non-organic produce now. And I think that's more obvious than it's ever been for different reasons. But again, I am more of if I'm going to say what should you buy, anything without an ingredients label. If you can, because basically anything with an ingredients label means it's not real food. There has to be something added to it. So what's the ingredients label on an apple? It's an apple. If you're going to get, hopefully a nice quality meat product as well, there's no added ingredients. And so for the most basic of the basic, if it has an ingredients label, again, you got to start to be careful. And certainly the longer that list gets on the back of the ingredients label, you got to be more and more careful with. And of course, the food industry is it's so poorly regulated that you don't even know what they don't even have to put on the label, or what word they're now using that is actually hiding what's actually in there. And so, the whole idea of the Whole 30 that's out there, Again, I think it has a lot of benefits, but for me, I don't say just do it for 30 days. I just say, hey, when in doubt, choose whole foods, choose things without an ingredient list. And now my company, what we do a little bit differently is to say, that's the basic starting point for people is, hey, whole foods, no ingredients if possible. Okay. And now from there, what we actually do for a lot of people is we actually do blood testing for different food allergies. And now why do we take it to that degree? Well, again, we see people with a lot of digestive issues, hormone issues, you name it, all these different things going on. And we say, well, we can't just say, go eat a healthy diet, because in their mind, they're like, I've tried the healthy diet. And so what we do with that blood test is we basically say, hey, we're going to test the most common foods that have the potential to be inflammatory or harmful inside of the body. And by doing that test, what we're going to do is say, hey, you might be allergic to an apple. And so for me to say, hey, go buy organic apples, it's going to be good for you, we might not be able to tell you that. And so we see healthy foods show up all the time that people actually, in the starting point of our programs with people, have to avoid quote unquote healthy foods because they're actually creating inflammation and are therefore harmful. And people ask the follow-up questions like, well, what if I eat an organic apple instead of just a conventional apple? Does that mean it's okay? And it's like, well, no, you'd just be organically sick then. And so it's still inflammation creating depending on the state of someone's environment on the inside. And so that's where we start to take it to a different level to say, hey, big picture, whole foods. But from there, why we start to do some further testing is to say, man, whole food just might not be specific enough depending on what someone might have going on.
It's great you brought up the topic of what do they call the ingredients that are mislabeled and whatnot. There's a term for them, I forget it, but one of the biggest ones is sugars. Sugars are the most common way to label sugar is spices at the end, and also how it's regulated per serving. So there might be 0.9 grams of sugar in one serving of a tablespoon. So you have 2 tablespoons, you have almost 2 tablespoons of sugar in your food. That's very common with butters and like peanut butter and cracker and whatever such type. So I think that's a great starting point for people to realize is keep that ingredients list low and do some research on what those sugars actually truly are too, because they can be sneaky. Speaking on inflammation, I've sort of read research that inflammation can be to a point good because it's helping, that injury spot like we spoke of, the ankle or something like that. But then, it gets to a point of what you're doing continuously, constant inflammation is bad. So how do you really understand better if you weren't doing a food test? How can we recognize those bad inflammation symptoms?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. I love that you get that, because again, we believe, and again, some people are going to disagree, and that's okay. If everybody agreed with everything we did, life would be easy, right? But inflammation, yes, in the short term is a very normal, natural, healthy response that our body requires. It's the way to allow a healing process to actually initiate and start to take place. Much like if you're being chased by a tiger, the stress response of fight or flight is a very normal response. You want to be able to run away from the tiger because I don't think you're going to want to fight it, right? So that same thing becomes a problem when that acute or short-term inflammation becomes that chronic or long-term, because that immediate response to try and create a healing direction, like in the case of the ankle injury you're describing, if you didn't get inflammation there, you will be prone to actually further damage and loss of integrity of the joint of the ankle, because that swelling is meant to brace it, protect it, bring all of the healing cells to that area to help speed up the healing process. If you never had the inflammation, you couldn't do that. But again, if that is a long-term, you keep re-injuring the ankle, re-injuring the ankle, re-injuring the ankle, and ultimately you're going to start to get things like scar tissue and lack of mobility. All these other things are going to start to build in, and that creates a very problematic cascade. And so when we look at inflammation, very rarely is it that short-term. Most of the inflammation we see is stuff that's been going on for a long time. And how do we ultimately assess that? And again, it's going to be different on different people. It's going to show up in different ways. I think that's what's unique. What's unique about it is somebody could each be experiencing the same symptoms, so to speak. So let's say their symptom is they get major bloating with meals. They just have some sort of digestive problem. Number one, it could be totally different foods that are causing it. Number two, it could be a totally different digestive problem that's actually resulting in bloating. And so that whole idea of inflammation for us, that's just a clue. That's like the big umbrella idea of, hey, inflammation is just telling us something's up. And so what we need to do from there is start investigating. And so from there, we start to dig a little deeper, whether through exams, we do x-rays in our office. That's a great way to start to visualize inflammation. That's where we start to do some more of the diagnostic testing, be able to tell us what's actually causing it. Because it's one thing just to identify there's a problem. It's another thing to be able to say, okay, why is this happening? And if I had to say what I believe the biggest difference is that, what I get to do every day, which I'm very fortunate with, versus what I believe traditional medicine does, is traditional medicine is trying to identify what's wrong and match a treatment to it. What we're trying to do is not only identify what's wrong, but say why. We want to start asking more questions instead of just, hey, take this for that. We want to say there's got to be something underlying that's going on here. And if you correct the underlying problem, you don't have to take something for it. And so it's more of, again, in our mindset, something that gets to the root of that inflammation to say, hey, short term, your body's doing the right thing. It's not making a mistake. Inflammation is normal, natural, and necessary. But ultimately, if it happens over and over and over again, our body is not designed for that. And that's when it starts to lead to breakdown in different areas of the body.
With the inflammation coming from different, obviously the wrong foods, you mentioned that long-term inflammation can build up scar tissue, you lose mobility and things like that. Is that a lot of the things that we see as far as people, oh, my knees hurt, my back hurt, my elbows, and they might not be overweight or they might not be, just kind of regular person, not extremely active, but they're consuming the wrong things?
Absolutely. So I'll tell you a quick story on that because he's a good friend of mine. He's actually one of our doctors in our organization. And he first started working with us about 2 years ago. And when he first found out about what we were doing, he's like, this makes so much sense. I want to start doing it. And what was unique at the time is he's early 40s. You'd look at him and be like, man, he's healthy as a horse. He's got like 5% body fat ripped out of his mind. And but he had so much joint pain in almost every single joint in his body, he couldn't play golf, which is just what he loves to do. And the only thing he did that changed it, and again, I wish everybody was this straightforward, this easy from an example, but he started avoiding foods that he identified were creating that inflammation. And within a week, every single joint was free of inflammation and pain. That's all it took for him. And again, that's the I wish everybody was that easy, but that's how big we see food being. Food is medicine. It is. And again, it's either helpful or harmful. And in his case, he was eating an incredibly healthy diet according to conventional standards, but it was all inflammatory creating. And so by just saying, hey, do you realize which foods are actually causing this? And we can actually black and white identify it, which I think most people would just love that concept because there's so much gray out there. Again, what type of diet? I've heard this is good. I've heard that's, what about the whole, should we even eat plants or what about carnivore? All this, there's so many different things out there that, again, it's where we start is say just what each individual food, is it good or bad for you? Let's just get the basics right. And for him, that's all it took. Joint pain gone, every single joint. He could play golf again, pain-free. It was again, it just stands out because he's close to me, number one, but number two, it was a week, literally a week. He was dealing with this for 5 to 10 years.
That's incredible. So what does the process look like? I walk into the Wellness Way, I got some joint pain, whatever. Walk us through what that process is of the food testing and how you guys find those issues.
Absolutely. So, really the most important goal that we have with anybody that is exploring, and I'll say the majority of people coming in are exploring. They've either heard good things or they're just desperate for some sort of a different answer. And so what we always do, and this is where, I am fully supportive of testing from anybody. And that's why our motto at the Wellness Way is actually, we don't guess, we test. So one of the first things that we do with people is we say, hey, have you ever had any previous testing done? Whether it's through another alternative provider, whether it's through your medical doctor, whoever it might be, because we can start to get clues from someone immediately just based on lab work, blood work, whatever it might be. And so that's something we will always review with somebody that initially comes in, even if it's a basic cholesterol screening or glucose or different, more basic markers there. But, then what we do is we just sit and talk with them. We try and find those nuggets, so to speak, those identifying things that just give us a clue to say, hey, we need to find out a little bit more about what's going on there. We'll ask them about what their diet's like, what their stress is like, different things in those regards. And again, like I mentioned before, x-rays are one of the first things we do for people, because you would be amazed just by looking at someone's x-ray. We can pretty much just say, hey, that's not right. We need to run this test because of what we see here. And so, yes, a food allergy test is a very common test we see, because 99 times out of 100, you're going to have people with a lot of inflammation in their GI tract. And again, that's not just because they're eating a bad diet. It's just because, again, our food supply, all these other things are just artificial ingredients, hidden sugars, all these things are starting to show up that you're going to have some sort of inflammation showing up. And then once we do that, it's basically a matter of saying, okay, this is what we're seeing. This is what we need to know more about. And so from there could be a variety of different things we would recommend from a testing standpoint. But even so, one thing I think that's cool about what we do, you never have to be a patient in our office to get a test done. You can just say, hey, I just want to get tested. Cool. We have people do that all the time. But again, what that does, and I love this, and I warn people all the time about this, as soon as you get that test done, it's going to open up a can of worms that you need to be ready for. And what I mean by that is, once you start to open Pandora's box, you don't get back out. And I'm sure that's with you guys too. As soon as you start learning anything about health, fitness, nutrition, it never stops. It is an ongoing, relentless pursuit of wanting to know more. How do I get better? What's the next? And again, now in today's world, it is changing so quickly all the time. And so we have patients that come in initially with that, hey, I might be super skeptical. I have no clue what's going on. Can you help me? To fast forward 6 months, and they're the biggest health advocates on the planet. And, they're just going off the deep end in a good way in our mind, where they're just consuming positive information and seeing their lives transform. And so, yeah, you don't even ever have to be a patient to even get some of that testing done. And that's something we've wanted to do, because we just want to create people that have an interest in their own health. And whether that's working with us specifically or not, that's okay. And we just want to give them the opportunity to be able to do that.
I have a family member that got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis at a pretty young age, a lot younger than what people typically see, and they changed a lot about what they do as far as eating, what they do for activities and things like that. So, I mean, you mentioned a lot of things, passionate about like autoimmune disease and such. What can people do to be more proactive with that? Is a lot of the similar things that we're talking about, and do they correlate kind of well with the nutrition as well?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think two-part answer. Number one is, I actually just a few days ago did a talk in our office on autoimmune issues. And, again, autoimmune is it can be a very sensitive topic, because for anybody that has it personally or knows somebody personally that's dealing with it, it is life devastating. It really is. And most answers they're ever going to get is, there's nothing you can do about it, and take this medication. And again, I'm not against it if it helps them feel better, but even something like rheumatoid, what we need to understand, and again, I am a keep it simple by nature person. Before we ever make something complicated, let's get the basics right first. And there's only 2 points I really gave as a takeaway at my talk, and I think it's going to directly relate back to your question, is, the first thing you have to do is you have to understand what it means when someone is autoimmune. Okay, and what that means is there is a trigger that is affecting the body that is resulting in a heightened, overactive immune response. And so why that's so important is if we understand those two parts, that there is a trigger, there has to always be a trigger. And then number two, it results in a heightened immune response. The two things are right there that we need to be able to identify in order to correct it. Number one, you have to find the trigger. What is it? It's different things for different people. It could be food. It could be stress. It could be an infection. I've had people, as crazy as it sounds, breast implants. It's foreign tissue in the body, has triggered autoimmune conditions. So it could be amalgam fillings in the mouth. There's a lot of different things that can be doing it. So you have to find out for that person what their trigger was. And the age can vary. It can be juvenile rheumatoid, which means very young, or someone can be in their 40s, 50s, 60s that finally triggers the rheumatoid. Okay, and then part two to that is you have to now normalize the immune response. So if autoimmune is a heightened immune response, we need to do things that can help to normalize or actually, in a sense, kind of bring down. But again, what does medicine do? Immunosuppressant drugs. Well, you totally crush the immune response, not normalize it, you suppress it. And then what the number one warning label is, if you've ever seen the commercials for them, increases risk of cancer. Okay, so you just shut off the immune response, so you're not autoimmune, symptomatic anymore, but now you're predisposed to cancer. I just don't know why someone would want to accept that as an acceptable solution. And so again, just those two things. Find the trigger, let's normalize the immune response. And honestly, it doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter rheumatoid or something like Hashimoto's thyroid, or lupus or psoriasis, whatever it might be. Autoimmune is autoimmune. Once you have it, though, this is the hard part for people to swallow. Once you are autoimmune, you will always be autoimmune, meaning you're not going to get rid of it. You are always going to have the predisposition for it now. But every single choice you make gives you the opportunity to either keep that light switch off, as I like to say, or if you're going to go eat McDonald's and eat stuff you're not supposed to and you're going to have a lot of stress and do the wrong thing, you just flip your light switch back on and you're going to suffer again. And so it is a constant pursuit forever, for the rest of your life, but you don't have to suffer. We see people all the time, rheumatoid factor positive on their blood work, go negative. It's possible. You just have to be willing to really put in the work and figure out what's going on behind the scenes.
Can those triggers be somewhat affected by genetics?
Great question. Genetics, I'll say this much. The type of autoimmune somebody is plays more in the genetic side, meaning, if someone's rheumatoid factor positive, they have, the autoimmune predisposition for rheumatoid, that does mean genetically, yes, it's there. Now, from an actual trigger standpoint, genetics really doesn't play into the trigger. And I'll say it this a little differently. There's a term out there, maybe you guys are familiar. If not, I'll explain it, but it's called epigenetics. Okay, and that whole word means basically above the gene, where our genes haven't changed for thousands and thousands of years. But what has changed is our environment and the expression of those genes. And so that's why, even if you have the genetic predisposition for rheumatoid, it's the environment, the triggers, what is affecting the gene from the outside that is ultimately what determines your end consequence or no consequence. And so again, we've had people that have been diagnosed autoimmune and are living like you'd never even know it, because they have basically turned off the gene switch. And so again, we can't blame the genes for why we're sick, but we can blame our lifestyle. We can't control our genes, but we can control our lifestyle. And so as long as we do the right thing and understand what each person needs for a congruent lifestyle, then we're in, then we can go.
So we did a show on nature versus nurture, just kind of breaking that down, talking about genes versus environment and whatnot. Are you familiar with that Netflix documentary? They talk about the obesity gene.
Yes.
Okay. So does that reference what you're talking about? Does that reference that? So someone can have that obesity gene, but the trigger,
absolutely,
it's optional for them to activate that trigger basically.
100%. So I think the most obvious example that is still one of those mind blowing, I can't believe it, Angelina Jolie. BRCA gene, which is the breast cancer gene, quote unquote. She realized she had the gene. So instead of saying, all right, now what can I do to make sure I never trigger this gene? She just went ahead and had a double mastectomy. That was her, I'm going to take care of this gene issue and just get a double mastectomy so I can't get breast cancer. It doesn't change the environment. You've just manipulated the organ that would typically get affected by that gene being triggered. The gene is still there, so she can still be triggering it. It just might not show up in breast cancer anymore. So the same thing with the obesity gene. Yeah, I mean, there's how many people they're trying to find a gene for everything. I mean, that's people don't want to take responsibility for their choices. I think for me, that's the oversimplistic way of saying people just don't want to accept that what choices they make every day are going to play the ultimate card into whether they're healthy or not. And so they can find all the genes they want to find. And I think what's unique is when they did the Human Genome Project, they realized we're more simple than a fly. They don't want to admit that, but again, it's not our genes why we're sick. Our genes haven't changed. But why are we sicker now today than we were 50 years ago, 100 years ago? Because of our lifestyle. It's all because of what we've done to really trigger all of that gene activity, all that gene expression. So again, whether someone has an obesity gene, you're not guaranteed anything. But you better believe if you're not exercising and you're eating a crappy diet and you have a lot of stress in your life, guess what? You're probably going to be obese.
I think that is extremely valuable for people to hear that sometimes there is no painting the leaves on a dead tree. It's just you got to either move it or replant it or something. Start with the foundation of what you're doing. So there's also interesting research about being, I guess people always say it's expensive to eat healthy, right? But if you look at some of the research and statistics, it's hundreds of dollars a month to thousands of dollars a year if you're overweight or even if you're just on medications for inflammation or this problem and that problem. So what is the best avenue you take for when you go to the grocery store, and do you buy everything organic, or there's some things that you can, some things maybe it's not, you don't have to, same with meats, same with just anything really?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest questions we always get is, if I can't afford this, what can I still do for this to be beneficial? And again, there's always a sliding scale of, okay, here's like the most extreme, this would be awesome if you can do this, to the, hey, let's make sure we're doing these things. One of my favorite resources that I love to tell patients and just the general population alike is EWG.org's Clean 15 or Dirty Dozen. And what that is basically says the Clean 15, if you're going to buy produce, these are the 15 you don't have to buy organic because they have the least amount of pesticides and herbicides applied to them. On the flip side, the Dirty Dozen, these are the ones that have the highest pesticide, herbicide content, so you better buy those organic. And so I think that's just a very basic starting point that a lot of people can go for. Certainly in an ideal case scenario, organic for everything would be the better option. But again, price worthy, I get it. I definitely do. I think in all honesty, the most important to get organic, get it right, has to be meat. I love meat. I will always love meat. You can't take my meat away from me, but you better believe it's organic, grass-fed every time. If it's fish, it's wild caught. Different things like that, because meat can be incredibly toxic otherwise. But again, it's whether you're trying to make a full leap or otherwise, guess what? I'd rather you eat conventional produce than eat a bag of Doritos. And I think that's where, of course, when you consider the price, people are like, how do we keep this low? Man, people spend so much money on fast food. They spend so much money on all the stuff they shouldn't be eating, that if they actually just apply that money to a healthier shopping cart, you don't even need to buy as much because you're getting way more nutrients. And show me someone who's obese from eating a bunch of produce. I don't think it can happen. I mean, you can try, but it's just not going to happen. The whole calorie concept One of my favorite authors is Gary Taubes. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him at all, but he wrote a book called Good Calories, Bad Calories, and another one called Why We Get Fat. And the whole idea is we can't just look at the simplicity of a calorie and say, every calorie is alike. Because if you eat 2,000 calories of Doritos versus 2,000 calories of produce, I hope we can intellectualize that that's going to be a very different end result. But if all we do is do the math and say, man, this is 2,000 calories, I got to stay under a certain calorie amount, it's not just calories in, calories out that's going to determine whether you gain weight or lose weight. Because I've had people, even myself, I could eat 4,000 calories a day and still lose weight. And yeah, I mean, I have a high metabolism and all that too, but if I ate 4,000 calories of junk, I guarantee I'd gain weight. And so that's where people want to lose weight. Everybody has, number one New Year's resolution every year, I want to lose weight. How do you do it? Not by starving yourself. You start by eating better, move a little bit. Again, back to those lifestyle choices that you're trying to make. So, how do you do it affordably? Exercise is cheap, right? Exercise is cheap, right? You don't need to, you can go to a local gym for $10 a month, right? Get outside, do body weight stuff, something. Eat as much organic as you can. I will always be an advocate for that. But if you can't, I love Costco, but don't go to Costco if you're on a budget. You can't go to Costco and not spend at least $100. It's just, I love Costco. They have some really amazing organic stuff, but, and my kids love it, but family of 6 going to Costco, that's not a cheap Costco trip, right? But it's definitely, there's ways out there now. There is more available. One of my favorite local stores is Aldi. Aldi is fantastic because you can get a lot of organic for really inexpensive. And so there are ways out there. You just have to be willing to put the effort into finding them.
So debunk this a little bit for us. When you hear, we're both, very avid with the meat, like grass-fed meat is red meat is substantially different than just regular processed meat. So on cholesterol, right? When people say eggs and red meat are bad for your cholesterol, but they still eat red potatoes or have a burger on a bun with fries and say it's bad for, burger's bad for your cholesterol. Do you believe, and have you, what kind of research have you found as far as grass-fed versus regular and the effects it truly has on cholesterol and bad cholesterol in the body?
Great question. So, man, I could go for an hour just on this question. So let me start here by saying I believe that the difference between the grass-fed and non-grass-fed, number one, has to deal with really the toxicity component that comes in. That's whether they're fed hormones, whether they're fed corn, or who knows what else they're actually eating. It changes the omega profile. So if you guys have heard of omega-3s versus omega-6s, if it's grass-fed, it's going to be much higher in omega-3s, which are the anti-inflammatories. If they're conventionally fed, they're going to be higher in omega-6s, which is more pro-inflammatory. So just in and of itself, that's a big deal. I think the thing that most people don't realize when it comes to cholesterol in and of itself, we only get about 10 to 15% of our cholesterol from our diet. Our body makes 80 to 85% of our cholesterol. And so people that say, oh, I've got to watch my eggs or watch my red meat for my cholesterol, I kind of laugh. I say, you're not going to change that cholesterol number based on just whether or not you're going to eat eggs or not. Because your liver is what is responsible for cholesterol production. And so guess what is the bigger deal? It's not whether or not you're eating the red meat, it's whether you're eating toxic red meat. Because if you're eating toxic red meat and the liver is responsible for dealing with toxicity, that's when your cholesterol profile starts changing. And so even for me, I think you mentioned the potatoes. Let's dive in that direction. Why potatoes are worse for your cholesterol than meat typically is because the most important marker on any cholesterol test isn't cholesterol, it's actually triglycerides. Because that's stored fat. It's basically glucose that didn't get used, glucose coming from sugar, carbohydrates, doesn't get used, our body has to therefore store it. That's what triglycerides are. Okay, so that's the number I actually pay most attention to when I'm working with patients of mine. And so I know if they've got a sugar issue based on their triglyceride levels. And so that's really the most important thing that I'm looking for. And as you get a little bit deeper into that, I have people ask me all the time, they've got high cholesterol, should I avoid red meat? And the only time you need to avoid red meat is if it's inflammatory to you. If you can handle it, we did a food test, beef didn't show up on your list, and you're going to get a nice grass-fed, go to town. And their cardiologists have a seizure, but for me, I love it. Because again, I have people that, they've dropped hundreds of points in cholesterol, and I never tell them to stop eating cholesterol. I just tell them, hey, let's just change your healthy life, give you a healthy lifestyle, move, eat better, and it's amazing what the body's capable of.
Wow, when I go back to edit this, I'm going to make sure I have a fresh, full notebook to take notes on this. This is great information. So the cholesterol is much like you spoke before on autoimmunity, the trigger. So we have 80%, you said, cholesterol in our bodies already. The fact that people have higher cholesterol or issues with cholesterol is because they're triggering it with toxicity. Okay. So when it comes to cardiovascular health, I've researched some things as far as it says, it's better to do short compounding, winded, like sprints over long distance running for healthier cardiovascular, or some people say vice versa. Can you dive into that one a little bit so we can get, some idea of where to start out for healthy cardiovascular?
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite topics because I hate traditional steady state cardio with a passion. As soon as I stopped playing sports, I'm like, I'm never running again. And so for me, it's just not something I enjoy. But when we actually, and again, all my answers come from research. They come from literature. They come anecdotally from working with patients. So, I really stay away from the opinion as much as I can, even though I have a little bit of a personal bias against it. But, let me answer it with a question. Because again, obviously you guys work out, you love your exercise, you're healthy as you really are working that direction. When you do intense weighted exercise, does your heart rate increase?
Yes.
Yes, it does, to the point that it can be incredibly uncomfortable, right? So let's think about the whole idea of, let's define cardio. Cardio just means heart, okay? So it has to be some sort of exercise that benefits the heart. Okay, so what is the heart? Well, it's a muscle. Okay, well, if you're trying to develop muscle, what's the best way to develop muscle? Weights, resistance training. But you need to have the important I word. You've got to have intensity, though. Because if you don't have intensity, heart rate doesn't go up. You don't get the same heart benefit. And so, again, if you've done any sort of weighted or resistance training, even short bursts, more the interval type concept, your heart is going to work, but it's going to do it in a way that it has to adapt. When you're in steady state, cardio, long duration, running miles, pounding the pavement, you're on the elliptical, all that, which again, I'd rather you do that than nothing. But when it comes to true heart benefit, it prefers intensity. It prefers intervals. It prefers weight load. And so those are things that ultimately, the whole idea of cardio is just a really bad term from what we believe we actually need to do to benefit the heart. And again, so I never do long, steady state anything. Everything I do, if I'm going to get a heart workout in, it's going to be an interval training type of exercise that is going to have intensity. And so, that's a common term like HIIT training. Yeah, I think it's fantastic for your heart. That would be my preference if someone asked, okay, if you only had one type of exercise to do for your heart, what would it be? It'd be a high intensity interval. And again, that can look a lot of different ways. That could be pushing a sled. You guys probably get nightmares from thinking about that again. But, pushing a sled, it can be even just basic weights. You can do, if someone's familiar with like a Tabata type interval, it could be body weight. It doesn't even need to be truly resistance oriented, but some sort of get that intensity high, get some rest in, but go back and forth, because that long-term steady-state cardio is actually very damaging to our body and our joints because we're not meant to do that. That's not what our body is genetically required to be able to do. And so you mentioned earlier about the inflammation, what's good, what's bad. Well, good inflammation is short intensity. Man, I got to survive this, whatever you're putting me through right now, and then I got to break. That's what our body's designed to do. It's not meant to sustain something for just hours on end, or even 30 minutes on end. People always complain, I don't have enough time to exercise. Yeah, you don't need that much time to exercise if you do it the right way. But again, some people love the running. Okay, that's fine, but you better get some weights in. If you ever seen the marathoners in the Olympics, that's a sick person because they are just so skinny. There's no muscle mass. There's really one thing, and I'm sorry for tangenting, but this is something this gets me boiled up a little bit, but the number one indicator of quality of life as we age is muscle mass. And so if you don't have requisite muscle, your ability for independence and long-term quality of life is gone. I mean, you think about the people that if you can't get up and down off a toilet, that's a bad day, right? I hope I can not need help going to the bathroom when I'm older. I hope I can get in and out of a chair. I hope I can be able to do it. The only way you can do that is if you have muscle that can work. And so that's why I believe not only just heart in general, but you've got to have the muscle that can support you.
Amazing perspective. Right now, Chad and I are training for a marathon. So
you suckers. No.
It's just because it's uncomfortable. We've never done
good for you.
Distance competition like that besides Chad doing his crazy military stuff. But it's hard. It's hard on the joints, like you mentioned. We're finding that the body it's almost like our bodies are adapting to the longer distance, and it's easier to run further. Our heart rates aren't as high, once you're training 10, 12, 20 weeks for this race. With the high intensity, the weights, you can constantly shock and change your workouts so your body's, I believe that's what causes muscle growth. Can you dive into that a little bit more, just on adaptation versus kind of tricking your body all the time through workouts?
Absolutely. Yeah. You said it perfectly. When you do the same thing over and over again, you better get better at it. I mean, it's almost a skill adaptation, number one. And then obviously the physiological adaptation of just getting better at the movement, getting more efficient at the movement. So again, if you run a mile every day for a week, I would hope that last time was better than your first time, not just because of any other reason that your body's used to running a mile now. But it doesn't mean you're any stronger. Doesn't mean you're necessarily any more physiologically benefited from it. You're just better at running the mile. And so one thing I've even recommended to people when it comes into, okay, I want to run a marathon, which, hey, that's not something I think I'm ever going to do. I really hope my kids never want me to run one with them. But if I did, I would do it different than traditional mindset, which is to say, oh, if you are going to run a marathon, you better run a ton of miles. I disagree with that. I believe if you have a requisite level of capacity, you can train much smarter and be able to adapt much better. I would rather run 10 miles intensely than 20 miles at a slower pace. Because I believe the person that can run 10 miles intensely, they can run 26.2 no problem. The same as somebody that can run 20 slow steady. Yeah, they can still run the 26.2 as well. But I believe that the way to get to master a marathon, if you're not a runner or not a marathoner in general, if that's not your nature, is create more intensity in your actual training sessions. Where maybe you're going to go do a 12-mile run, but hey, do 1 mile at a 6-7 minute pace, and then do the next mile at an 8-9 minute pace, and kind of go back and forth. That's going to be a really brutal workout. But you talk about not hitting a wall, then when you hit the marathon, your body's going to say, this is nothing. And so that's where I think, my encouragement to anybody that, I ran one 10K in my life. That's the furthest I've ever run. And the furthest I trained for that was a 5K one time. And everybody's like, how'd you do so well? My body just said, I just viewed it as a workout more than I viewed it as, I had to train to just get better at running a 10K. So again, it's that adaptation. You've got to put stress on yourself. And for some people, the stress is, hey, you just got to go do miles. But again, if you do miles after miles after miles, yeah, you're going to start to feel it. You're going to start to break down and wear down. And so I think the people that can more intelligently run less miles are actually going to benefit more than people that just get more sheer volume in the training.
When I was training for Scout Sniper Screener, something kind of just developed that way. Like my program sort of just developed that way. I would run around a track and I would sprint as far as I could, about 200 meters around the track, and then just barely jog towards the end, just kind of trot. And I would do similar things on hills. I didn't know I kind of knew what to expect from the screener because people just, be ready to do the obstacle course, be ready to run some hills. They didn't really tell you what it was, but that was probably that was really the only times I ran on purpose other than when we were made to run. But those interval runnings were the most beneficial thing I think I could have ever done to gain my running. And we ran, it was about 5 days of running nonstop. And that's kind of how I structured it now for this marathon. And people asking me too what I'm doing to train for the screener, and then going into the screener and doing it. I wasn't first on everything, but in top because of that style of training, sprinting hills and kind of jogging down and sprinting the track as far as I could. And I think that's another thing people can realize too is for me at least, it's been effective where the high intensity could be 60 seconds of sprints, and then you're like trot walking. You could be trot walking for like 2 minutes, but you got to catch your breath, and so you can do an intense next 60 sprint, so it doesn't have to be so like 30 second or 40 second, 20 second. It's more everything you have for a short amount of time, and then take a minute, not 10 minutes in between, and go from there. So that's kind of how I've structured my running now, is I'll do like telephone pole to telephone pole for like 2 miles or whatever. And that's been hugely beneficial. So another thing we used to tell people too before they would go to like sniper school, which is 3 months, guys would be like, what should we expect as far as at school physical activity? And me and one was my team leader and myself, we would always say, try and get as much muscle mass as you can before you go, because you're not going to have time there to lift. You're going to be doing running, you're going to be rucking, and you're going to be physically active all the time, but you're not going to have time for resistance training. So we always said, gain as much muscle as you within reason before you go, so that you have that 3 months you're going to be continuously breaking down. At least you can kind of feed off that for a while. So correlates what you were saying about getting off the toilet when you're older earlier. So
I mean, I just I love what you're saying there, and even for maybe some takeaways from the average listener that might be saying, okay, how can I simply apply this? I'll tell you the most effective way to run a mile. Ready? Run the straights, walk the curves. 100-meter sprint, 100-meter walk. 100-meter sprint, do it for 4 laps. You want to talk about a workout, but again, you better sprint, or within reason, obviously. Don't hurt yourself. That's a whole other side of it. You ought to be able to exercise in a way that's not going to injure you in the process. But if you do something simple like that versus just running a straight mile, it is a totally different beneficial level of exercise. And because again, it's the adaptation. You're forcing yourself. Here's intensity. Give my body a chance. More intensity, give myself a time to recover again. And so really the benefit of exercise is never in the exercise itself. It's always in the recovery. How well can your body recover? And ultimately, I believe that's what most people that do that long duration never allow themselves is most people have no idea how taxing that is on their joints, on their body, that if you're doing it day in and day out, it's not enough time. I mean, you guys obviously have lifted some weights in your life, and that's something, again, we're not going to go do bench press every day. So why would we go run every day? And so it's no different. It's still using the same muscles every day, obviously running different than bench pressing. But, when we get to smart exercise, you've got to do some variety.
Yeah, when I was 17, I bench pressed every day.
Dr. Abbott, greatly appreciate your time. Really appreciate how you can simplify these very complicated topics. You do an excellent job of just breaking them down and making them simple for people. So thank you so much for joining us today. For our listeners, you can see Dr. Abbott at the Wellness Way in Green Bay, correct?
Yep, absolutely. And then we're on Facebook all over the place, the Wellness Way Green Bay or just the Wellness Way. Our website, thewellnessway.com. But again, we put free content out daily, live shows on a constant basis, just because, again, the more, we can just help pour in and educate and inform people on, again, just viewing health differently is really what we're all about, just a different perspective. It's one of the best ways just to start that process and say, hey, maybe you're not ready to go all in. That's okay. Where can I start? The Clean 15 Dirty Dozen, or Shop the Perimeter, Whole Foods, whatever that looks like. You can do it, and just our just get started. Do something. One thing. That's it.
Love that. Get started. And go give them a follow. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, do us a favor, leave a 5-star review. Share it with someone. This is quality information. Go share it. And like Dr. Abbott said, go get started. And shoot us a message if you think we should have him come speak at the Solutions to Wellness Expo. I think he could provide some value.
Hey, I'd be all for that. So
awesome.
Thank you guys.
Thank you again for your time, Dr. Abbott.